Payment, Part 1, Rain and Shadows. Kuvi strode through the alley, boots squelching in the mud. What a miserably wet planet. While one hand held his coat over his head to keep the rain off, his other tapped a few times on his comm screen. He held the small rectangle to his ear. Fen? Yeah, boss. Get the ship ready. We'll be leaving sooner than we thought. Kuvi ducked past a few junkies huddling under a makeshift awning. I'm still at the vendors. You know what they charge for rations at this place? Yeah, I know. Kuvi briefly pulled up his shirt to show his weapon, causing the beggar to bow slightly and back off. They're just about the only option in this system. Fen sounded frustrated. It's robbery. Anyway, got the last haul sold off. I still have to negotiate for the fuel. Get it done! I've got the other thing almost taken care of. We gotta leave before nightfall. Why the rush? Got an offer. Transport for a couple dozen. Payment? Good. Real good? Fen's voice pitch rose. How good? Kuvi groaned as a gutter decided to overflow onto his head. He ducked against a derelict warehouse and tried to shake the water off his coat. Like vacation for a few revolutions good. Fen's grin could be heard through the comm. I'll get it done. See you in a few. Kuvi's boots thumped up the wooden stairs onto the rotting walkway. A couple revolutions ago, some enterprising individual had attempted to build a path to keep creatures out of the mud. Now it was held together by the slightly drier mud caked between the boards. Kuvi flared his spines at a pair of conmen and shoved away some shifty-looking swindler. He'd been on planets like this most of his life. Those kind of tricks didn't work on him anymore. Go find some youngling only on his second atmo. The harsh light of a particularly gaudy sign marked the establishment he was looking for. Kuvi acknowledged the hulking Gwijek security and ducked under the low door. Every backwater planet like this had a dozen of these on every street. Dive bars. Every smuggler, crook, and lowlife knew the type. Dirty, dark, full of a haze and smelling like a mixture of stale atmo from deep space and harsh foods and drinks. Barkeep that mopped aimlessly at the bar with a dirty rag. Didn't matter what planet you were on. A dirty rag was always wiping the bar. There were a few traditional patrons, people who just wanted to drink or eat before they launched again, but only a few. The rest knew what went on behind the facade. This was where you paid or traded to get what you wanted. Non-sanctioned slaving, substances to get you higher than core standards officially approved of. Cargo respectable hauling companies wouldn't touch. Places like this is where you got weapons, valuables, some creature to keep you warm out in deep space. There were a dozen places like this on every edge of Black Planet. But Kuvi liked the drinks at this one. He spared a glance toward the stage. None of the dancers looked appealing. Too many tentacles or limbs. Didn't stop a lot of other bipeds, though. He slowly wound his way through the crowded creatures, retracting his spines to avoid touching the air that somehow felt dirty, despite the filters built into the ceiling. He glanced up, then pulled his spines even tighter. Never mind. They didn't look like they still worked. Kuvi grabbed one of the only open seats at the bar and eased himself onto it with a sigh. First time he'd sat all day. The barkeep stopped her wiping and twisted the upper half of her bulbous body toward him. Kuvi, smells like you. Hey, Jaylee, remember what I like? Course I do. I remember what every creature has ever ordered. Kuvi raised his head spikes in thanks and accepted the small container she pushed toward him with one of her appendages. He gingerly took a sip and closed his eyes as the drink activated a surge of endorphins. Perfect. He pushed a small paper toward her and leaned closer. It's all there. Location data and inventory. Jael slipped the note into a fold of her blubber. Same time next cycle? One of my guys will be along. He grinned, leaning back and taking another sip of his drink. The trick to enjoying this, Kuvi contemplated, was to consume it slowly and evenly. He was no longer bothered by the dirt and haze. In fact, he was starting to feel very contented with his life. One more hauling job, then a few revolutions in the core, living well above what he deserved. Maybe find a female. His daydreams were interrupted by flashes in the corners of his vision. He lowered his drink and turned to study the milling mass. There were two creatures pressing through the crowd, creatures with white-out thermal signatures. The bipeds were trying to conceal it. The blinding heat was blocked along their torsos and limbs, leaving only a dull red, dimmer than most of the creatures in the bar. But at their joints and extremities, wait! They weren't trying to hide it. They were wearing body armor. Cuvey knew what thermal transfer looked like through composite materials and metal. Stuff like that wasn't rare in a place like this, but those bipeds were wearing some serious hardware under their cloaks. He pushed his drink away. Time to sober up. The bipeds picked their way through the crowd, eventually reaching the bar. One leaned casually against it, but Cuvey was close enough to see the tautness in its frame, and the way its hooded face rotated to observe the adjacent creatures. The other stood over the bar, gently placing a small, wrapped bundle on the counter and waiting for Jail to notice. Cuvey tuned out the other patrons to better eavesdrop and tried to casually lean closer. He hadn't stayed alive by letting information pass him by. The creature's voice was computerized, probably filtered through a translator, but spoken in passable common. The inflection suggested it had inquired about something. Jail spoke back, a statement, and the biped reached out with a hand similar to his own to pull back the cloth around its parcel. Cuvey hadn't seen that shape before. It was joined at one end, but curved slightly and widened before narrowing again into many points. A sweet smell faintly drifted from it. Incense, maybe? Jail took the strange object, rewrapping it and storing it somewhere under the bar. She spoke once more, and the biped tapped his hand once on the bar and turned away, striding toward the exit, followed by its companion. It turned too fast, as for a single instant Cuvey glimpsed beneath the cloak. Cuvey tapped the bar with his fingertips for a few seconds, watching the creatures leave, then swallowed the last of his drink in one go. Jail approached him again. "Cuvey," her voice was low. "Those were Terrans, and I smelled a lot of metal." Cuvey consciously tried to keep his spines flat along his backbone. "Don't think they're civvies," he muttered. "They had bones on." They asked about other Terrans. "They aren't exactly common, even in the core." Jail's appendages were writhing in agitation, so she began wiping again. "I've only seen one other in my time here. Have you ever—" "No, just heard tell. Everyone's been bored in deep space and told a few stories." Cuvey's fingers were tapping the bar again. "What's that species doing out of its system?" "Cuvey, may I borrow your eyes for a moment?" "Tell what they gave me." She withdrew the wrapped object from under the bar and pushed it toward him, shielding the view from curious eyes with several of her appendages. "No thermals, it's ambient." Cuvey passed his comm over the surface. "Comm says it's yellow." She stored it once more under the bar. "They said it was a foodstuff from their homeworld." "Enjoy it," Cuvey said absently, rising to his feet. "See, smell you sometime." "Cuvey?" "Yeah. I thought you said there'd be a couple dozen—" Fen hissed through the comm as Cuvey hurried towards the docks. "There's like 50. Species? Deseret. But there are 3 others. Smaller sort and 2 big things. Got stuff on so we can't see." "Gwijek?" "Maybe. Big ones." "The other look like me? Little shorter?" "Yeah, I guess." Cuvey cursed under his breath, ducking under an awning and shoving his way through the crowd around a vendor's stall. "Ask for double." What if they say no? Cuvey couldn't keep the exasperation out of his voice. "Don't let them on!" "Yeah, boss. What's going on?" "Just saw some Terrans." Fenn's voice carried a smile. "Thought we had something real to worry about. You got me for a moment, though." "I'm not joking." Cuvey ended the call. "Tap, tap, tap." Cuvey dumbed 2 of his fingers on the railing, looking down into his cargo hold. The huge bay doors were open, and occasionally gusts of wind would drive the rain into his ship. Tap, tap, tap. The Desreti were storing their belongings under the supervision of Fen, making sure every piece of luggage was restrained properly, and the weight distributions were within tolerance. Cuvey caught the pointed glances his first mate threw up at him, so Fen hadn't missed the telltale bulges under the Desret's clothing. They were armed, all of them. Tap, tap, tap. Cuvey turned abruptly and strode along the walkway, ducking into a hallway. The payment was worth this. It had to be. Just a transport job. The taxi service wasn't the illegal part of this haul anyway, and there was only one checkpoint unless the security had been improved. Doubtful. Still, that was a lot of mercenaries. He reached the passenger quarters and knocked once before sliding open the door. He took a moment to feel the comforting weight of the blade on his hip before stepping into the room, steeling himself against the 2 hulking, hooded shapes in the corner. Did Gwijek get that big? He mentally shook himself and stood at a kind of relaxed attention with his hands clasped behind his back, facing the smaller, cloaked biped. "Hello, sirs. I'm pleased to inform you that we'll be lifting off now. He steadied himself against the slight swaying of the ship. Fen was good at his job, always knew how to tune the artigrav to mitigate the G-forces of launch. It will be approximately 3 hours to the nearest relay station. From there, we will transfer to our second lane and exit into Atlian void space to clear their checkpoint security. One more FTL lane jump and we'll be at your destination. Entire journey should take about 4 days. The shorter creature nodded, its covered head. Kuvi was about to flare his head spikes in agreement when it spoke, the translator masking its natural voice. How do you intend to get us past Atlian security, Captain Kuvi? Kuvi felt his gut go cold. Very carefully he adjusted his spines to appear non-threatening. You told me you had the proper authentications and identification codes. Captain Kuvi, you are being paid extravagantly for your work. Kuvi clenched his fists behind his back. I don't do creatures. Captain Kuvi, we need passage through 3 FTL lanes to a remote world. Surely you can manage that? I told you, sir. I don't do creatures. You will be dropped off back on the surface. He spun and stepped out of the room, slipping the comm from his pocket and connecting to Fen. Yeah, boss? Turn the ship around. They don't have ID or authentics. Fen breathed a few choice words. Kuvi smiled without humor, climbing the steps into another hallway toward the bridge. At least we caught it before... He froze. One of his crew was sprawled unnaturally against the side of the passageway. He dropped the comm and kneeled, rolling the body over. Her throat had been slashed. Multiple stab wounds to the abdomen, bruising around her eye sockets. Kuvi swore. A hiss down the passage snapped his head up. Desret, 2 of them. They saw him too, began to move towards him. Kuvi dropped her head onto the deck and scrambled back along the hall, sliding the blast door shut at the end of the passage behind him. He slammed the lockdown, closer to the bridge so it was on his side. He cursed. The comm was still beside her body. He sprinted up another set of stairs. He could bypass that hall and still reach the bridge. He could feel vibrations in the deck under his feet. Something big was moving toward him. Fast! Faster than he could run. Fen! Kuvi bellowed with all the atmo left in his lungs. Lock it down! He could see the bridge now. Less than 20 meters. He could feel the thing behind him, but he didn't dare look back. Kuvi dove through the door, rolling to come back up on his feet. Fen shoved the door shut, but a hand caught it before the lock engaged. A massive, clawed hand. Fen growled and slammed the door shut again and again on the hand. Roars of pain came from the other side until, with strength Kuvi hadn't seen for a long time, the portal was rent halfway out of its grooves in one heave, throwing Fen away with a mangled hand. The creature crouched through the portal, followed by the other. Kuvi wished he could just see the creatures they were dealing with. The cloaked unknown turned his blood cold. The biped stepped through, pausing a moment to observe the broken doorway. It turned to face Kuvi, speaking with its filtered voice. Captain, get us out of Atmo or I'll kill your man. Kuvi held up both hands, moving slowly toward the pilot's chair. It took only a few moments to set the ship on its last course off-world. I can't get you past Atlian security. I smuggle cargo, not creatures. This isn't worth it. Use your brain. The computer stripped almost all emotion, but Kuvi was sure the biped felt humor. You'll figure something out. Fen was getting to his feet slowly, slipping glances toward the ceiling before looking toward Kuvi again. Kuvi nodded nearly imperceptibly. He flared his spines, effectively adding another dozen centimeters to his height and increasing his apparent mass, focusing the enemy's attention. He walked forward a few paces, still holding his hands palms up. Think about what you're asking me to do. There the first tremors, barely able to be felt. You want me to get you past a core world's checkpoint with no authentication? The biped was just about to speak, almost got the first syllable out when the ship bucked. There is a point in every Atmo exit where the artigrav fights the planet's gravity. Kuvi thanked the stars he hadn't upgraded his to a newer model. His ship jumped hard. Fen was ready, using his bulk and multiple limbs to smash one of the creatures into the wall and raining blows onto its head. Kuvi lunged forward to bowl the smaller biped over with the point of his shoulder. The creature was stunningly heavy, and the shock slowed him, slipping the blade from his hip. The creature's backward-facing knee punched into his gut, causing him to recoil before the other foot slammed into his quad, driving him back. With blinding speed, the other huge creature charged. Kuvi sidestepped the first wild haymaker and jabbed upward into the side of its torso. The stab jarred his arm, and he felt the blade snap. Kuvi cursed and dove away, coming up in a half-crouch, the shard left of his blade held ready. Fen gave a grunting cry and reeled back with claw marks streaking blood down his arms. Kuvi stared at the enormous creature in front of him. The hood had fallen from the charge. Gwijek didn't have horns. The smaller biped walked slowly from behind his bodyguard, touching the side of his helmet to retract the mask from his face. Although he was taller, Kuvi felt the emanating intimidation. Without the translator, his voice was far more organic, soft and neutral, with a curious accent that rendered Common all but unrecognizable. Captain Kuvi, I require passage through these specific FTL lanes. You will smuggle me past Atlian security and allow me to reach my destination, and you will do it before the others of my kind can hunt me down. He paused a moment before baring his teeth. And I promise you, Captain Kuvi, when it comes to my kind. He leaned closer, thermals whiting out Kuvi's vision. I'm one of the nice ones.